So good morning, everybody. I'm Phyllis. I am the facilitator this morning. I want to welcome everybody, and this is a good turnout so far. I'm sure there'll be a couple of late arrivals. There always are. So I need to flip to my other screen to read the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that what we know as the United States is the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples. Members of our group today are on the lands of the Tonkawan, Lipan, Apache, and Comanche in Austin, the Chitimacha and Cherokee in New Orleans, the Chitimacha in New Orleans, the Creeks and Cherokees in Atlanta, the Nalapi and Piscataway in Maryland, the Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples in Boston, and the Cahuilla and Mojave in Riverside County, California. We thank their ancestors for being stewards of these lands through generations, and we state our intention to continue that stewardship now and into the future. So I'm going to go over the rules. Most people have been here at least once before, I think. So I will keep a list of who has raised one finger to speak. And if you raise a finger, move it sort of slowly back and forth, make sure it's on screen, and be patient because there's 16 little squares to look at right now. If the person speaking says something, a word or a phrase that you do not understand or want them to clarify, you can raise two fingers. And that will let me know that you want to clarify something they said, and I will put you on the list. I will let you jump in and ask that clarifying question. The clarifying question should be a question. It should just be like, what did you mean when you said, or I didn't understand this word. Very simple like that. If you really feel like your impulse is to make a point, get on the list with one finger, and you can make your point. If the question asked is not a clarifying question based on our guidelines, I will let you know, and you can get on the list if you choose to. We do ask that people keep themselves muted during the discussion unless you are the one talking. And we'll see how it goes. Sometime a little bit after 11, I'll probably start the roundup so that everybody can get a chance to do the wrap up. Anybody who has not said anything during the meeting will get 2 minutes during the final wrap up. Everyone else will get 1 minute. And then we'll finish. So this is being recorded, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. When it's posted to YouTube, your faces are available, but your names are not visible in the squares. That's just how it does when it records. And I don't post the chat. So I do want to ask, before I have people introduce themselves, Nancy, I might have to step away to go get a delivery downstairs. If I do, can I just ask you to take the list and I'll tell you who's on it? Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's go around and introduce ourselves, and then I will say why I brought this article, and we will start the discussion. So Stanton.
Good morning, Stanton, Austin, Texas. Been coming for about 5 months now.
Louise.
Louise from New Orleans, originally with Erace. Well, I'm not from anyway, it's a tough morning. Went to Erace in New Orleans about 20 years ago. Then Katrina happened, and now I'm in Austin.
Great, thank you. Marion.
Hello again. Good morning again, everyone. I'm Marion Lagarde here in New Orleans. I've been attending the race discussions since 1993.
Welcome. Lynn.
Good morning. I'm Lynn Frank in New Orleans. I probably have to leave early today. So I wish you goodbye now, but I'll stay as long as I can.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Jean?
I'm sorry. I'm Jean Walker in Silver Spring, Maryland, right next to the DMC. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you. And I've been coming up, I think about 8 months now.
Thank you. Nora?
Morning, everybody. I'm Nora. I'm here in Austin, and I've been coming for probably almost a year. Good to see everybody.
Welcome. Narva?
Good morning. My name is Marva, and I've been attending Erace post-Katrina.
Thank you. Susan?
Morning. I used to be a member of Erace back in the 94, back then, way back, and just recently got to catch up with some old members and able to get back on again.
Nancy?
Good morning. I'm Nancy Moore. I'm in New Orleans, and I have been attending since June of 2007.
Thank you. Pedro?
Hey, good morning. I'm in just outside of Austin and in a town called Spicewood, and been attending these meetings for a little over 2 years.
Glad you're here. Beatrice?
Hi, good morning. Beatrice Sublé here in East Point, Georgia, attending Erace since '93 when I was at home in New Orleans, and I'm co-founder with my late husband, Larry, of Erace Atlanta. Glad to see everybody.
Thank you. Richard?
Morning, everybody. Richard here in New Orleans with Erace since the beginning, 1993.
Thank you. Larry?
Good morning, I'm Larry. I started attending Erace around 1995, and unfortunately, I'll be checking out a little bit early again today. Thank you.
Thank you. Marla?
Hey, good morning. I've been attending Erace since, I guess, 2020 or a little before maybe. And nice to be back after a couple weeks away.
Teresa?
Hi, I'm Teresa Roberson, and I'm in Fayetteville, North Carolina. This is my second week attending. Oh, and I'll also be leaving early.
Okay. And Glenn?
Glenn Abdullah, been coming to Erace since '94. Looking forward to this morning's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's everybody. As you all know, I'm Phyllis, and I brought the topic this morning. Last weekend, Sunday, W. Kamau Bell's show on CNN, United Shades of America, covered the land back movement among Native Americans in this country. And I've heard the term, I didn't know a lot about it. I went up looking to do some more research, and I came across this article, which I did not know about, this sort of collaboration coalition between Native Americans and Palestinians. As some of you know, I have a pretty passionate feeling about the Palestinian cause, and I have been to the Gaza Strip in the 90s for a couple months. I actually stayed with families there. And also, I just love when people that you don't expect to link up and fight for liberation. And so I don't know if it's realistic to think that in this country, well, it is realistic because some native groups are getting some land back. And I think the settler colonial project stretches to various places across the globe. And in my opinion, also Israel is a settler colonial project. So that is where I'm at right now. I'll have more to say at the end, and the list is open. Oh, Harvey. I'm sorry, Richard.
My middle name.
I know.
Which I prefer to use on this. I just, no problem, Phyllis. This article, I'm virtually and totally in agreement with the sentiments expressed. I think it's a very well written article, and like you, Phyllis, it's the first I've heard of collaboration between the Palestinians and Native Americans on land rights. As I was reading this, I was thinking about, from my own interest in ecology and stewardship, and there's a lot to get into on this, in that in my mind, and I think many Native Americans would agree, that they would have a totally different relationship traditionally to the land than the colonial settlers did, which carries through to this day. Today, it's the settlers who have the no trespassing signs up on their property. I doubt Indigenous Americans ever did. The Indigenous Americans, the Native Americans, saw themselves as stewards of the land, not of owners of it. It gets back, I believe, to their view that even inanimate objects, rocks, stones, the earth, has a spiritual significance to them. It's not a matter of ownership, it's a matter of stewardship. And I would be interested to know if anybody knows about the Palestinians' attitudes towards the land, whether it's much the same thing. I believe the nomads in much the same attitude, that it's stewardship of land, not ownership of land, that's important. And I think this gets back to the very history of colonial America, is that once Americans felt like the European settlers, that we own land, that became a fundamental difference between American settlers and Native Americans. And I think the Native Americans had the right idea. It's stewardship that's important, not ownership.
Thank you. The list is open unless I missed B and Stanton.
I always like to see, first of all, amen to what Rich is saying about stewardship rather than ownership, and earth being our mother, and those kinds of things traditionally Indigenous people are known to have believed. I like to see a through line between disparate groups in terms of what colonialism has done, because once we see that there is a continuation of what happened in the past to disparate groups, we can join together and really make some changes and discuss how better to make things. I think sometimes about how different, and I know this is like, dream world, this country would have been had the Europeans learned from the Indigenous people how to tend the land, how to treat the buffalo, how to do, even now learning how to do the planned burns that would have saved us from all of these horrible wildfires. European people came here with the idea that we know what we need, we know what we want, y'all have it, we're gonna take it. We're not gonna learn anything from you. We're learning now, of course, how horribly the Catholic schools trying to, here in our country as well as Canada, trying to make children be something that they were not, taking their language, their religion out of them, because what we have is better. And it's white supremacy, but it's an attitude that is so narrow that we don't feel that we can learn from somebody who's not like us. We are better than. We come here with our own ideas about religion, Europeans did. And so my real point is that we need to be able to see a through line to what has happened to the world. I mean, you think about the continent of Africa and how rich the resources were, and how the people were, first of all, taken, we were taken, but then we were ripe for that kind of overcoming of the resources and taking resources and not giving the people anything. You can look at Haiti and what happened after that revolution and how they had to pay reparations. I mean, just the whole picture of it is uncomfortably disgusting. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Larry, did you raise a finger, Larry? Okay, I thought I saw it, but it was really quick. Anybody else want to get on the list? Okay, Stanton, you're up, and then Larry.
Yeah, I shared a couple of minutes with Phyllis before anybody else joined the meeting that I found this article particularly disturbing and verging on what I would call anti-Semitism. I am probably, as far as I know, the only Jewish member of this group who participates regularly. And I want to just read something that I've kind of put together from various sources online and from various articles I read. I wasn't smart enough to have a spontaneous response to some of what the article said, but if you will indulge me, and hopefully I can get this done within my allotted time. In recent years, Zionism has become a topic of considerable critique in left-wing spaces. Some scholars suggest that the contemporary expressions of anti-Zionism on the left have their roots in anti-Semitic Soviet propaganda from the mid-20th century. The Soviet Union pushed action that under the banner of Zionism is racism, and it resulted in denial of rights to the Jewish population. While there is room to scrutinize Zionism as a philosophy or ideology, or be opposed to Israeli government policy on an issue, the left has engaged in a consistent, unrelenting campaign to delegitimize Zionism, the state of Israel, and anyone who supports them. Left-wing anti-Semitism can start with vitriolic criticism of Israel as an illegitimate state, accompanied by allegations that Zionism, the movement for Jewish self-determination and statehood in the land of Israel, is a global society ill that must be eradicated. At times, this can border on the conspiratorial and involve prejudice. Rhetoric can range from accidental stereotyping to intentional vilification of Zionists and Zionism. Often Zionists are accused of being tools of imperialism who must be fought at every turn. In left-wing spaces in the United States, Zionists have been vilified as racists who must be shunned. As this becomes more normalized within segments of the American left, a hostile environment is created for Jews and anti-Semitism likely becomes more acceptable. Thanks.
Is that the end of your statement?
I have one other sentence if you would indulge me.
Go ahead.
It further isolates Jews as an increasing target of right-wing violent extremism. It's incumbent upon everyone to be on guard lest problematic attitudes by some opponents of Israel on the American left go unchallenged, and that is my challenge to this group.
Thank you, Stanton. I've got Larry. Oh, a clarifying question from Richard. Sorry. You're muted, Richard.
I just wanted to get clarification from Stanton, what specifically in the article he perceived as anti-Semitic.
The troubling paragraph I had was the one that started with the NDN collective was motivated in part by a desire to counter Zionist uses of the concept of indigeneity. If anyone understands world history, the Jews are the indigenous people of that region. And if you want to trace back 3,000 years of history, I would encourage everyone to do that. And if you understand the Jewish diaspora, you would find that the term 19th century settler colonial movement for white Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, I find that particularly offensive.
Okay. Thank you. Larry, and this is.
It has always amazed me in terms of just what is meant by anti-Semitism. And it seems like whenever someone may speak up for the cause of the Palestinians, they're labeled anti-Semitic. And that's not true. It's almost like some Black people might cry out that every time a white person uses the word nigger, they are racist. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But I think in context of relating the land belonging to the Indians and the land belonging to the Palestinians, the question might arise, will America ever give back that land? Make any compromise on it? And the question relative to Israel is, I don't think Israel would never agree to a right of return. I don't think Israel would never agree to an independent, sovereign Palestinian state, which is allowed to have a military right on Israel's border. I don't think Israel would never agree to a divided Jerusalem. I don't think Israel would never agree to dismantle the settlements. And so we have a continuous situation that's not going to be resolved, I don't think, through diplomacy. And the United Nations has passed several resolutions calling for Israel to give back the Palestinians their land. But with the support of imperialist America, Israel has almost carte blanche to do whatever it wants to do to the Palestinians and to the land itself. And that's my thinking on it. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Lynn and then Louise and anybody else. Okay, Lynn. You're muted. Okay.
I wanted to join Stanton in protesting the one-sidedness of this article. And I followed a link that stated it very clearly, the one-sidedness. We recognize the Palestinians as the indigenous peoples with an indigenous connection and right to their ancestral line. We recognize Israel as an illegal settler colonial state that has inflicted and continues to inflict immeasurable violence on the Palestinian people and should be held accountable in all measures. So that statement gives no recognition to the Jews who lived on the land after the diaspora, because there were still many who lived both in the southern region of Judea and the land of Israel in the north. They never left. They are indigenous people too. And the Arabs who came into these territories, I can't establish the timeline, but how far do you have to go back to be indigenous? They came there also, so they're all indigenous, and it's a damn shame they can't live together. I am very saddened by the way the state of Israel has treated the Palestinians and taken over people's homes and lands and olive groves and lemon trees and not let them have the West Bank. They've totally destroyed any sympathy they might have had with most of the left in the world. It's on the other hand, let us not forget acts of terrorism by the Palestinians and how they didn't want to negotiate for many years. I think there's plenty of blame for both sides. Oh, and to your question, how many Jews are in this group? I am Frank. My late husband was Jewish. I may be half Jewish in my heart, but and I identify with Anne Frank.
Thank you, Lynn. I've got next Louise and then Larry, because we're only doing L names right now, I guess. And Stanton.
So there is no doubt that this is an extremely emotional topic, and one that I also, Phyllis, am very involved in, as I was engaged to a Palestinian gentleman when I was younger, and my family have been over there. I haven't personally to be in Palestine, but anyway, I am very much for the rights of people who are being kicked out of their homes, and that's, I think, the main argument against the Israeli government, who are doing these attacks really on peaceful people it's families. I mean, I know there are some aggressors, obviously the Arabs, but there are just peaceful families who are just wanting to live their lives, who are having to deal with daily aggressions. And I do believe that both are indigenous to the area. Yes, the fact that they will never, I mean, it will never be sorted out, will it? It's just such a horrible situation. There are many Israelis who are actually, wanting to fight for the cause of the Palestinians. So it's not, an Israeli Palestinian thing as much as, there is, I think it's just been publicized more because these things have been going on for a long time. And it's not anti-Semitic, I believe, if you're against what is going on in the occupied territories. I don't think that's that's a little wrong to call it that just because you believe in justice, because there is a lot of injustices going on there. And I don't know, it's just too deep. There's just too much to say. I'll listen. Larry said a lot of what I agree with also.
Thank you, Louise. And next is Larry and then Stanton. And
You know, although Israel right now is basically a secular nation, there are religious parties in Israel who keep pressure on the government, and they take this whole dispute back to the Bible days, back to God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when God promised them the land of Canaan. And Joshua led them across the Jordan River to take possession of that land. But when we go back that far into history, the question is, well, whose land was it before Israel got there? Who was on that land? Now, Israel may be looking at it from a religious perspective and say, well, God promised this land through Abraham. But everybody don't look at it from the religious perspective. And so when the United Nations has passed several resolutions hoping to resolve this conflict, but with the support of American superpower, Israel just continued to ignore these resolutions. I mean, how do we resolve that? Do we say that Israel just have carte blanche authority to do what they want to the Palestinians? You know, that is why during slavery days that you had a Nat Turner arise with the Nat Turner slave rebellion and some others. The Palestinians don't have bombs and missiles and jet fighters, so sometimes they resorted in the past to what we might call terrorism. But one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And so that's where we are now. Thank you.
thank you, Larry. Stanton and then Beatrice.
Just for clarification, I don't want to give the impression that if you are in opposition to Israeli policies on the West Bank, the creation of the Palestine state, the establishment of cities or territories on the occupied lands. I don't agree with a lot of Israeli policy personally, and I don't think that if you disagree with Israeli policy, you're anti-Semitic. I think you're anti-Semitic if you do not believe that the Jewish people have a right to self-determination and to have a homeland in the form of a state called Israel that was created by a United Nations partition and was opposed to by every Arab state in the region and was attacked on numerous occasions because it is the stated objective of many extremist organizations in the Palestinian world to annihilate the state of Israel. So that is what I consider anti-Semitism. The destruction of the state of Israel, to me, is an act of anti-Semitism. I do also want to say that as far as giving land back, I have stated before that I am the child of Holocaust survivors. My family, my grandparents, they had property, they had businesses in the area that's now Ukraine. I don't see anybody advocating for the return of those properties to my family or to the deceased relatives of the 6 million who were murdered. I don't want to blame the Palestinians for the Holocaust. They were not responsible for it. But I do want to just say that there's a little bit of inconsistency in who supports whose right to get things back when it doesn't affect them. I'm going to ask anybody here, if the next time a Native American knocks on your door and says, hand me the deed to your house, how many of us are going to be willing to do that?
Thank you, Stanton. Next, I have Beatrice and then Glenn.
I think two things can be true at one time, while they may seem to be not so. I think that I was in the process of looking for a wonderful little book that Jimmy Carter wrote some time ago about apartheid and what was happening to Palestinians. I think, and Stanton referred to this, that the building of permanent settlements on occupied lands after the war, I think in '68, is not the right thing. I think that anyone who, I don't think it is a good thing for people who say that Israel has no right to exist. I mean, all of that is not right. And the fact that people who are throwing rocks sometimes are being shelled with bombs, that is not just. And so I think that there's a way that this needs to be looked at in a way that justifies the existence of people and place and does what is right by people and their descendants. And because everybody is not trying to get their land back, or there are people who might feel you deserve the right to return their land back, does not mean that some people, it is not justified that some people are. For example, the indigenous people who had all these treaties that we supposedly wrote, which ended up being of no value whatsoever. I mean, in the United States of America last week, the number of treaties that our country broke after supposedly deciding that they were going to fairly occupy land is very disturbing. And that can be we got the receipts on that, and that needs to happen. The return, whatever form it takes, if it means that, well, whatever form it takes.
Yeah, all the treaties, Beatrice, were broken. Not one was kept. Nancy, I have to go get the package. Glenn is next on the list, and then the list is, and Larry. So can you take over? You have to unmute. I'll be right back. Thank you.
Glenn and then Larry. Okay. Glenn.
Okay. First of all, the Palestinians and the Jews, before the European Jews invaded there, they were getting along peacefully. They lived in peace, along with the Christians that also lived in Jerusalem. They lived in peace. It wasn't until those Europeans came over there from with their entitlement, believing they had some type of entitlement to move the Palestinians out of their living space, so that so room could be made for them. And it was a strategy. It's not innocent that it just happened like that. It was a strategy to put the Palestinians where they are right now, and even to where they don't have any type of the land that they once had. And when you cage people like that, you're gonna have some of them gonna lose their mind and go crazy on you. Now, I do not believe in innocent people being killed. I believe in you. I believe they've been justified in killing every person in the army that they can get a hold of. But going and putting bombs on buses and all that, but you make a certain percent of the people become like that. It's your treatment. I don't blame them for what they're doing to you, what they're doing over there. I don't blame the Palestinians what they are doing. I blame the Israeli government for what they are doing. No more than I could blame Nat Turner from killing babies, hacking them up in their cradles. I blame the condition of slavery for what Nat Turner done, and I blame the conditions that the Israeli government has put on the Palestinians for what they are doing. And I want to get back on. I'm gonna wait a while to get my thoughts together.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Glenn.
I'm
All right.
back.
Oh, you're back? Okay, well, Larry is next. Is there anybody else?
Former President Jimmy Carter wrote an excellent book on this subject called Holy Land, Whose Land? And the book was, you might say, slanted towards the Palestinians. But Jimmy Carter was accused of being somewhat anti-Semitic. Now, if the modern state of Israel was created by the Balfour Declaration in 1948, which created the modern state of Israel, then what about the historical state of Israel? Whose land was it before the Balfour Declaration? The Palestinians were just run off of the land. So do they have a right to return? No, not according to Israel, because if they did, give everyone and their descendants the right to return to Israel or the land, then Israel would be far outnumbered. And politically, that will not be feasible. And so I think this thing is not going to be resolved until some kind of serious annihilating war take place. It's unfortunate, but you know, how long have we been talking peace? Henry Kissinger, you name it, from diplomat after diplomat, but nothing is accomplished. The more peace talks happen, the more land Israel take. So nothing has been settled at all. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Larry. The list is currently open. Oh, Stanton. Glenn, did you want to be back on the list yet? Anybody else?
You can put me back on.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Stan.
I just want to add, this is not just European Jews who came to Israel. There were 850,000 Jews from the Middle East and North Africa who were forced out of the countries that they lived in after the creation of the state of Israel, because the powers that be in those countries did not want them there and made it impossible for them to live there. 130,000 Ethiopian Jews who are Black Africans were brought into Israel in the 80s because of conditions they were experiencing in Ethiopia and oppression. And currently Israel, primarily a country of Middle Eastern and people who are from Spain and Portugal, Sephardic Jews. So it's Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews who make up about 60% of the country of Israel. So calling it a white country is also a misnomer, because it is not exclusively a white country. It is not what South African apartheid was. And I do also want to just throw in one other thing that was bothering me. It's just this NDN collective, their participation in the discussion, while they have a right to participate just as anyone else does, it's curious to me why, again, do they have a position paper on what has happened to the Rohingya people in Myanmar? Do they have a position on what's happening to the people who are the Uyghurs in China? Do they have a position on what happened to the Yazidi people in Syria by the Islamic State? This country lost its mind after 9/11 when the towers were attacked and we invaded a country and stayed there for 20 years. I don't know how many of us would put up with suicide bombers on buses and in cafes in this country. There's a lot of stuff to go around on both sides. I don't disagree with that statement. But again, I think what Lynn said earlier is that this is a sort of cited article. That's all.
Thank you, Stanton. I've got Glenn and then Larry. And anybody else?
Yeah, you know, just because the powers came together and said this is what it's going to be, and push all those foreigners into Israel and push the Palestinians out of the way. That don't make it right. These powers kept screwing up the world, dividing and say, well, look, Russia, England, and America say how they were going to divide up Poland, how they're going to divide up all these different countries, who's going to take what. Just because they decide that they'll make it pure, like it's being told, that made it pure, that made it good because they decided. That's like if you the Ukrainian people, if you bring them here to New Orleans and they force me out of my home, you think that's no different than what happened to the Palestinians. I wouldn't tolerate it. You taking something that I've been paying for, that I have worked hard and sweated for, and you're gonna just take me, out of it. Then you're gonna build a wall where I can't even farm my land like I was farming it, let my crops die. No, it's inhumane what that government is doing, and I won't be sad if they get destroyed. That's my opinion.
Phyllis, can I get on the list, please?
Yes, sorry, I didn't. Who is that? Is that Richard? Oh, Pedro, sorry. Yes, so I've got Larry and Pedro next, and then anyone else? Okay.
You know, as much as we might try to.
Put me on, Phyllis.
Okay.
As much as we might try to ignore it, we cannot ignore the historical relationship between Israel and the land that they own in terms of the promises that God of the Bible made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It goes back that far. And only God is going to be able to settle this. Now, when we talk about the Ashkenazi Jews, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that.
Ashkenazi.
Okay, thank you. The Jews that came over from Europe, you know, during the airlift, the Ethiopian airlift of the 1980s, I think it was, when those Jews were brought to Israel, they called them Falasha Jews. One of them made the comment that they didn't even know there were any white Jews. And so these black Jews had been embedded in Ethiopia for these thousands of years, probably stemming from when the Queen of Ethiopia went to visit Solomon and came back with his child, perhaps in a better. That's just my opinion on that. But yes, you know, this is a religious conflict. The Jews and the Arabs really are brothers, both descendants of Abraham, you know, the cousins rather, or something. There's a relationship between them, you know, so, you know, God asked Israel at one time in the book of Isaiah, come now, let us reason together. You know, can we reason our way out of this thing? Is a conflict going to be the only resolution? Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Good timing. Pedro and then Greer.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's passion about this issue of Jewish rights and Palestinian rights. I think in the context of this article, one thing to keep in mind for me is in the same ways that Manifest Destiny has authorized the genocide and removal of indigenous people in the so-called United States based on divinity and superiority, you know, just imperial, having the imperial might to impose your will on other people kind of thing. But the indivisibility of rights to security, I mean, this goes to Ukraine issue too, that you are entitled to your own sovereignty and national security until and only if it does not infringe upon another nation to coexist without threat. For instance, our position was to argue that Ukraine has a sovereign right to join NATO, but did Russia have the right to oppose government allowances to not have NATO missile sites in their range, and the allowance of Ukraine to have that NATO build up right to their border? Did the Ukraine coup in 2014 that we were responsible for, that brought neo-Nazis, real neo-Nazis, to more than half a dozen cabinet positions in that coup government, that there's Nazis on the doorstep of Russia, in a country that just a generation before lost 26 million people to Nazi Germany. And then finally, what is also not appreciated is there were 14,000 deaths by right-wing led Ukraine post-coup government forces, okay, post-coup forces on these ethnic Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the Donbass. Nobody cared or mentioned anything about that. So I think, just to sum up, that these are movable parts that, both people can have a right to the same kind of deal, as long as it doesn't infringe on the other's rights. So it's a very complicated issue, but those are just my thoughts.
Thanks, Pedro. Greer is next, and then the list is open. We have time for several more. Stanton. Greer, go ahead.
Okay. We all know that America supports Israel financially to the tune of over $40 billion a year. America hasn't done right by the Native Americans. So do you think they'll force Israel to do what they aren't willing to do?
One.
Ethiopian Jews came over under the auspices of brotherhood and religion to Israel, and more likely to create a state that remained an Israel state, because the more people who you have there who are Israeli or become Israeli, then it remains an Israel state. But if you have a lot of people coming in who aren't of the religion, then it ceases to be that. But yet when these people came over, you dropped them in the ghetto, you burned their blood when they donated it to having it used to help people who were hurt. And they've even been attacked by their fellow Jew. So, I mean, you can tout that Israel is inclusive, but really it's not when you treat your brothers and sisters substandard. And moreover, I'm gonna speak on America. America spoke against apartheid in the United Nations while it was doing the same thing to people of color in America. So how do you talk out of both sides of your mouth and still want to speak on what somebody else is doing when you're doing the exact same thing? Both of these countries are hypocritical, and that's why they're tied at the hip financially. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Greer. I've got Stanton and then Glenn.
Yeah, I'm also just going to throw in some more facts and statistics because I think they're important. There are currently 1.9 million Arab Israeli citizens. There are 14 members of parliament who are Arabs out of 120 total. The people, and I don't want to start getting into all this historical discussion because I'm not a historical scholar, but there are multiple reasons why Arabs left what was the Israeli side of the partition in 1948. And I don't think there's any one specific reason that they left. There are multiple reasons, including atrocities committed by Jews against Arabs. I will not deny that, but there are atrocities committed on both sides. The bottom line is, again, I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier, is that if you are someone who believes that the right of Israel to exist is up for question, then I believe that's anti-Semitism. And I'm going to, stick to my personal belief, just as everyone has their own. But like I said, it's kind of difficult to feel like the person who has to stand up for that side because of my own personal history, but so be it. And just as much as other people think that the Palestinians have a right to survive and exist. I think my people have a right to survive and exist, and that survival was greatly questioned during World War II.
Richard has a clarifying question.
I know this gets into the dicey issue of semantics, but I think semantics make a big difference.
Wait,
when
are
we're
you
talking about
making a
Yes,
statement?
here's no. The question, I'm prefacing the statement is that people who don't believe in the survival of Israel are anti-Semitic. Are not the Arabs themselves considered Semitic? And that if being if you're
Making a
in
statement.
that context, that's the question. Is it clarify the anti-Semitism in the context of the Arabs themselves being Semitic?
Louise, I see.
I'm just going to say that in my modern understanding of terminology, we know what anti-Semitism means. It means people who are opposed to and hate Jews. And even though, yes, we are all Semitic peoples in the region, I don't think being anti-Semitic refers to people who dislike Arabs. I think those people are generally called Islamophobes. So
Not all Arabs are Muslim.
this is true, but it gets very just a semantic discussion, which is not worth getting into at this point, in my opinion. But
Louise, did you have a clarifying question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, your last thing, Stanton, you said was that you believe Israelis have a right to their land and to flourish as a community, but you also think the Palestinians have a right to their land and to flourish as a community?
absolutely, yes.
Okay.
But now it's a question of you accept what happened with the UN partition or you don't. And if you want to say that the people who left now have a right to come back, I'm going to tell you, I don't have a right to go back to Ukraine legally. And this is just an aside, since I was asked a question. I also found something that I thought was interesting, that in 2019, Ghana created something called the Year of Return, which says that any person of African ancestry can come to Ghana and become a citizen, to what they refer to as the objective to rebuild the lost past of 400 years. I don't think anybody would call that racist to say that people of African ancestry have a right to go back to Africa if they want to. So if a country there is welcoming them and giving them citizenship because of the historic wrongs, great on them.
Okay, thank you. Next on the list is Glenn, and then the list is open. You're muted.
Okay, how does Israel been able to get away with breaking UN policy so long? America, all right? They got America by the balls. The government, the government of Israel, along with its allies in America, and also the Christian people who believe that they were supposed to return, and once they have Jerusalem in their hands, then that's going to mark the time of the return of Jesus Christ. So they have a powerful ally in the Christian people in America, and I would look like no matter what Israel do, American government cannot oppose it because of their political. They got PACs here in America that everybody got to go and grovel to them to get elected. I think that's CPAC. So they are America, the government of America, even those who want to do something cannot do. Those who did try to do something, they wind up losing their next election. So that's what got them about. And when the Palestinians left their areas, they left their areas strictly out of fear of their women being raped and also their men, civilians being killed. All this stuff about what happened to the Jews and they're doing the same thing to the Palestinians, what happened to them. That's the hypocrisy of it. They are doing the same thing. They may not be putting them in a furnace, but they're doing the same thing. That's it.
Thank you, Glenn. It's APAC you're talking about, American
Yeah.
Israeli Political Action Committee.
Correct.
Okay, the list is open. Anybody want to get on it?
Can I
Yeah,
get?
you put me on it.
Pedro and then Glenn again. Go ahead, Pedro.
Oh, wow, that was quick. So really good discussion. And a very difficult topic. I want to just kind of clarify a little bit what I was trying to get at is I think that, you know, everyone has the right as a human being to life and to liberty. And I guess when I hear people say the words "my people," I think it's really important to be loyal and to have that cultural identity, but also at the same time have a parallel understanding that we are all of one people. And if we only look at it from my people versus we are all people, then what may happen is what I perceive my interests will sometimes land on the top of or on other people's interests. And that's the indivisibility issue that I was trying to get at. That is really important. That what may appear in our hearts to be a loyalty to some type of principle. Again, going back to that Russian example, that Ukraine has the right to join NATO or not. Well, Russia has the right to not have missiles on their border. And if we had missiles on our border in Canada, in Mexico, that type of thing, I don't care what the UN would say. Our country would not tolerate that, and we would be fine with that. So I think that's just what I wanted to clarify a little bit. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you. Next is Glenn, and then I think we'll go into the wrap up after Glenn.
Okay. When the Jews say never again, they're strictly talking about themselves, that they will never let this happen to them again, what happened in Europe. That's what they ain't talking about. They're not telling the world, that's not let this happen to any people. No, not just let that happen to us. When they were in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Nazis built a gate around them where they had to enter in and out through that gate. And whenever there was any rebellion coming from that ghetto, they were able to shoot them like ducks in a pond. They fought back. Some of them fought back, but just like the Palestinians, they didn't have the equipment to fight off what the Nazis had. So what they're doing in Israel, they built a big wall to keep the people in. They all got to pass through a gate. If they decide and they care that they separate the person's land from the man from making his livelihood, they didn't care. They didn't take none of that in consideration. That government is a monster government and needs to be destroyed. That's my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. So we'll go into the wrap up. We'll do the people who haven't spoken yet, who have 2 minutes here. I'm going to read that list of people and you tell me if I missed anybody. I've got Marion, Jean, Nora, Marva, Susan, Nancy, and Marla. Anybody I missed? Okay, so Marion, would you like to take your 2 minutes, or anybody who wants to can also pass?
I'll take the 2 minutes because what I have to say might take just that amount of time. Many years ago, when I was a little girl, around 9 or 10 years old, in Sunday school, the Israelis were referred to as the Israelites. I never heard anything about Palestinians until I was in my maybe middle to late 20s. And I was very curious about all this conflict. This is a very there's a complexity in these issues, and there's a lot of hypocrisy. I had 2 Nigerian classmates who called Black people in America mongrels. And I dared to stand up to one of them. I said, so it's Black people's fault that we are intertwined with white people? I said, do you realize that these African Black people were kidnapped from the continent of Africa? And one of them told me, well, nevertheless, you're still mongrels. So I cut it off at that point because I know it was going to be an argument that was going to go around and around and around. So I'm going to go back to my old simplistic statement that says we have to recognize each other as human beings. There's tribalism here, and I know people have this attitude about being in defense of your own kind, but until we as human beings can get past what people look like, who people are descended from, we're always going to have this conflict. I see no reason why, and it's going to sound very naive, that there has to be this big hoopla between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Palestinians were there for decades. They have a right to live where they were. And if the Israeli people, and I'm not anti-Semitic, I by no means consider myself anti-Semitic, believe that they are truly God's chosen people, they're there now, but I see no reason why they have to snatch the land away from the people that were also there for eons. So that's my stand. And
Thank you.
I,
That
for
was
one,
that was
I'm
your
going to
2
speak up
minutes.
and say I'm not a mongrel. Okay.
Thank you.
You need more than 2 minutes, Phyllis, today.
Yes. Next I have Jean.
Yes. Well, following up on Marion's comments about looking at each other as humans. On my street, there's a Jewish couple. They're now deceased. They adopted 2 Arab children, and Shelley's still living in the house. I don't know where her brother is, but they're still in contact. And across the street is Nuhad. Nuhad is Palestinian American. She's married to an Eritrean, as a matter of fact. They met in college. And then when Nuhad's mother was alive, she was in Palestine when the partition came. And she related to me how the family, she was a teenager then, they had to sneak out of their house, take what was on their backs, and leave for fear of their lives. And they did stay in the Middle East, I know, for a while. I can't remember her whole story. At some point, they ended up over here, but I used to have visit with her. We used to have breakfast or lunch or something together, and I always remember that. And then I think about the time that I read about the Israelis, people who saved a Palestinian olive garden because they were going, the state, I guess, was going to confiscate it. And they came and they barricaded so that they couldn't destroy his vineyard or whatever. And, you know, individually, there are people on both sides who look at the humanity of the other people and know what's right and what's wrong. And, you know, we have to find our hope there, I guess, because the whole world's really a mess. And it's unfortunate. We all are just one human race. I have to hang up now. Everybody have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Jean. Nora, you're next. Nora? I think Nora's sleeping. Nora? Do you want to take your 2 minutes? You're, no? Okay, you're muted, so I can't, and I don't read lips very well. Okay, gotcha. Next is Marva.
Thank you for sharing all your views and information. I thoroughly thought it was an informative discussion. I have so much to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Susan.
Hi, great discussion. I think when I was reading the article, it just was interesting to how they brought those to the indigenous tribes here in North America and the Palestinians, and how to look at those, how the similarities and how to look at it. I too feel like I need to further educate myself. I too feel like, you know, we are all one human race. It's very interesting the years and years and pulls and fights over ownership of something, when we truly are have to find a way to live together. That's it.
Thank you, Susan. Next, I have Nancy.
This is a very interesting topic and very interesting discussion. Like a lot of people, I do need to educate myself more on the current state of affairs in Israel. But thank you all very much for sharing all your thoughts.
Thank you, Nancy. Marla, you're the last 2-minute person.
Okay. Yeah, very grateful for all of the different opinions here, certainly as I am every week. This is the first final thoughts that come to mind about humanity and reclaiming humanity. You know, this is, I think, another great example of how it's money and power first, and the reclamation of humanity isn't even part of the narrative. You know, it's we're guided in the United States by where the money lies. As evidenced by, I saw the latest statistics in a July article that $3.8 billion goes to Israel from the United States. But Joe Biden has also allocated 500 million to Palestinians. So he's tiptoeing around what the really, big issue is, and just trying to placate both sides per usual. So anyway, that's it. I appreciate all of the opinions and viewpoints, and really things that were unexpected, especially. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Now we'll go to the 1-minute list. I've got Greer. Greer?
All right.
Oh, there you are.
It was an interesting article. And, everybody wants to talk about humanity and people should be treated as human beings, but apparently we aren't doing this. This is why this organization is here. And I remember when President Obama won his presidency, I was watching videos of reactions from all over the world. And I was watching ones in Israel and how they called the president everything but a child of God. There was more N-words being hurled than a little bit. And Biden gave us, well, not Biden per se, but it was voted to have Juneteenth as a holiday. But with the 5 nations, beyond that, Blacks were still held into slavery because of the sovereignty of the 5 nations. So even after Juneteenth, which we celebrate, you still had Black people held in slavery by Indians. So it's ironic that they want something back. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Greer. Glenn? Glenn Abdullah. Are you there? Yes.
Excuse me.
That's good.
Yeah, I do know this, that most Jews do not believe in Zionism. They're against it. And they're against what this government is doing in Israel. And they don't believe in that you can use the Bible to say that this property is yours, that God guaranteed that was for you. Can't bring God into court to testify for you. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Louise, you're next.
So I think the crux of this matter is walking in another person's shoes, right? Even down to the minuscule thing about, your work colleagues, putting yourself in their positions instead of getting irate and frustrated with them. As I said, my brother lived for under a year in Palestine, and the stories he told me are horrifying. So I think we all need to, what we see is on the media, the news, what they want us to see. If we actually lived the life in the place, in the area, and saw with our own eyes, we would all have a little bit more compassion and empathy towards what is going on, in both sides, for sure. But it's just the same thing, we just need to understand other people's, what they're living with, the way people are, and that would make us better. I have very little hope, I'm afraid, but I've got to stay hopeful. Got to stay hopeful.
Thank you, Louise. Beatrice?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Whenever history, politics, religion, land, place, all of that come barreling up against one another, it gets really complicated. But because we can't do everything, doesn't mean we can't do something. And because we can't work for what the Uyghurs need and all the people who are displaced or treated unfairly, doesn't mean we can't do something. Native Americans, however, had the idea of 7 generations. That's how what you do, how you have to know how it's going to affect 7 generations. In 1948, Ralph Bunche and them never thought about that. They never thought about what is going to happen to the people that are presently living on this land if we decide now that this is going to be Israel's right. So it's complicated, and I don't know how it's going to be resolved. But like Louise, we have to remain hopeful, but know that, as I said, once history, politics, religion, land, all that comes together in a gumbo, baby, you got yourself a mess right there. And it's going to take some great minds, some great hearts to solve it. I agree with a lot that what my brother Glenn said. And thanks to everybody. And I support Stanton's point of view as being a person whose family has been hurt by what happens to land, politics, religion, and all that together. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Beatrice. Richard, you're next. 1 minute.
Yeah, I also agree. This was one of the more provocative, certainly lively discussions that I've been participating in. The article, did speak at least half to the issues of the Native Americans and to their broken treaties and to why they are in solidarity with the Arabs and the Palestinians. I have to get back to kind of reemphasize what I said earlier about how we as of European descent really cannot, we can never really get into the mindset of Native Americans about how they choose to treat the land, which is the correct way, which is not to see it in legal terms, which is not to see it from how too many people have interpreted the Bible to say that we should have dominion over the earth. The Native Americans had the right idea about stewardship, and the European Americans, unfortunately, we fouled too much of the American land's nest, and it's coming home to roost. And we have a lot to learn from how Native Americans traditionally lived softly on the land.
Thank you, Richard. Pedro, you're next.
Thank you. So, yeah, Dr. King said national allegiances should be subordinate to, serving God, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong, and not just follow national allegiances. I find that really important in this discussion. I also, the words never again, but there's not been a peep in mainstream media about this neo-Nazi reemergence and prominence in Ukraine since the coup that President Obama endorsed, who said never again in one of his UN speeches. There has to be accountability for these actions that bring back the first neo-Nazi ridden government since World War II. Yet it's completely, ignored in our mainstream media and stuff. So very complicated questions, but those things are striking to me, and I just wanted to remind people to look at that history. Thank you.
Thanks, Pedro. And Stanton.
Well, living in a country that I see is moving towards neo-Nazism and fascism and Trumpism, I will tell you that I am personally happy that I have another place to go to if I need to. And I will tell you that I am particularly concerned that that may become a reality. So while Glenn says he doesn't care if the state of Israel is destroyed, I am, for one, happy that it exists for my benefit. So that's where I'm at. And sometimes you got to take care of your own.
Thank you, Stanton. So now I'll say my final thoughts. As I said in the beginning, I have read a lot on this topic and have personal experience in Palestine, specifically in Gaza and the West Bank, with Palestinians and some Jewish people there that I met. In a strange turn, I agree with a lot that Larry said today. I'm sorry he's gone. But two things I don't believe is that the Bible is a real estate document for anyone, or that this is a religious conflict. This is a state power situation. People always said the situation in Northern Ireland was a religious conflict too, but it absolutely was not. And I've also been there. And they, people didn't used to have hope that that would ever get resolved, and it did. So I hold out hope that the Israel-Palestine situation can also be resolved peacefully. The question came up, I think, from Richard about stewardship versus ownership. And you might be aware, Richard, others might not, that, a lot of Palestinians had olive groves, and they grow figs and grapes, and they have sheep and goats, probably mostly goats. And one thing that the settlers, this is what they're actually called, even in Israel, the settlers there, they will attack people trying to harvest from their land, their own land, and they will sometimes burn very old olive trees. And that is heartbreaking. And then, as this article says, Israel tries to claim that they're very environmental because they plant trees there, but they plant trees on villages that they stole from Palestinians, turned them into public parks. Ever since I, became very aware and active in Palestinian rights, anytime it comes up, the term anti-Semitism comes up. I think the fact that it is used to mainly mean being against Jewish people doesn't mean we have to accept that, because somebody said the Palestinians and the Mizrahi Jewish people especially they're blood relations. They are related by blood. And they were living peacefully in Palestine until the European Zionists came in and started a war. So I'm trying to read my own writing. It's always a problem. I'm sorry Lynn had to leave too, because I really oppose the use of terrorism to apply to anything that the Palestinians do and nothing that Israel does. And there, not only is there a right of return, there's a right of resistance. People who are occupied in their own countries have the right to resist. So Palestinians have that right to fight back. They don't have to, be Gandhi and sit around and fast all day. They don't have to do it the way Martin Luther King did. They have a right to try to get people off their land. And I want to say I think we've talked about this before, the way the Ethiopian Jews were treated when they came to Israel was talked about a bit, but also that there was forced sterilization because they don't want too many brown people in the country. I do believe that Israel is an apartheid state. I don't believe that apartheid always has to be based on strict race lines. In this, it can be class, it can be religious. I think the religious, the state of Israel is a secular government, and it's stated there are Jewish people there who don't recognize it because it isn't a religious state. And they don't support it, and they don't support the occupation. There is a very strong Jewish peace movement in Israel, Israeli peace movement in Israel. I, still see Ukrainian flags flying from houses here, but I've never seen anybody put up a Palestinian flag when Israel bombs Gaza, as they did in the last couple of weeks, and purposefully targeted children, which it came out that Israeli soldiers were reporting. And also, everyone in Israel has to serve in the military, so I don't necessarily think anybody qualifies as a civilian. So, I feel like I have so much compassion for anybody who went through the Holocaust or has family members who were lost or traumatized by it, 100%. But that wrong by the Nazis against the Jewish people in Europe does not make it okay what the state of Israel is doing to Palestinians. It just, if it were a family situation, it just perpetuates the cycle of trauma and abuse. And we are all a family. So I'm probably going to be done with this call and then have a lot more I want to say. I hope that people who didn't know much will do some more research. And I will say that I had lovely hospitality from Palestinians in refugee camps and Palestinians in cities, and the rabbi whose house I went to for Sabbath when I was there. So I, think that there are good people. I don't want to say both sides because that's too Trumpy. I want to say good people on both sides. But I think there are people who do care about living together peacefully on that land. And I want to wrap up and say, really interesting how much we deflected from talking about what America has done. I want to say that, and I just spent my whole time talking about that, but America has done many things in common with Israel, and I think we were their blueprint personally. They even talk about their fight for independence. And I'm like, wait, I don't understand. You came and occupied the land. What were you fighting for independence from? So like nobody, sent you there to colonize other people. You did that yourself. So I think, maybe the next time I have a topic, I'll bring something that's just Native American related so we don't get too off track. But America has its share of problems and ways that we have defiled the land here and the people who are on it. So I'm going to thank you all and stop the recording, and then we'll do announcements.